A tough-as-nails rancher is tied to a tree by hired goons, but they made one fatal mistake. They didn't check her wrist. They thought they were sending a message to her husband. They had no idea what kind of man they were about to meet. The larger of the two men, Jed, pressed his grimy finger into Savannah's shoulder. "Mr. Thorne sends his regards. He said to tell you this is your last chance to sell." Savannah stared back, her eyes burning with defiance, not fear. As they cinched the thick rope around her wrists and the rough bark of the old cottonwood tree, she subtly pressed a small, almost invisible button on the side of her rugged field watch 3 times. Miles away, a phone on a nightstand buzzed, displaying nothing but a single set of GPS coordinates. This story needed to be told, and if you believe that no one should be silenced, show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. And let us know where you're watching from and comment with the word justice so we know you stand with us. The story begins in the vast, unforgiving plains of rural Wyoming. Here, Savannah Washington, a third-generation black rancher, ran the Circle W, a sprawling property that had been in her family since her great-grandfather first staked his claim. She was respected, known for her sharp mind and an even sharper ability to read cattle and weather. She was the heart of this land, and she refused to let it be ripped away by corporate greed. The problem was Silas Thorne, a land baron with a reputation for devouring smaller ranches through intimidation and legal loopholes. He wanted the Circle W for its water rights, and he was done asking nicely. This ambush wasn't the beginning, but it was a violent escalation. For months, Thorne's company, Frontier Holdings, had been pressuring her. Fences were cut, wells were mysteriously contaminated. Her prize bull went missing. Savannah reported it all, but the local sheriff, a man who always seemed to be enjoying a free steak dinner at Thorne's exclusive Cattleman's Club, found no evidence. Thorne's strategy was clear: isolate her, break her spirit, and force her to sign away her heritage for pennies on the dollar. Tying her to a tree on a remote service road was a message, a brutal display of power meant to terrorize her into submission. What Thorne and his thugs didn't know was that Savannah wasn't alone. Her husband, Clay, was a man who had seen the worst of the world and returned from it with a quiet, lethal calm. He was an ex-special forces operator, a ghost who had walked through deserts and jungles, and now just wanted to live a peaceful life. But peace was a luxury they could no longer afford. They had prepared for this day. The watch was his idea, a silent alarm linked directly to him, bypassing any compromised local authorities. It was a lifeline for the exact moment when talking was no longer an option. As Jed and his partner Earl finished their work, they stood back to admire it. "You just sit here and think about the offer," Earl grunted, spitting tobacco juice near her boots. "Someone will find you, eventually." They laughed as they got back into their pickup truck, kicking up a cloud of dust as they drove away, leaving Savannah alone with the wind and the vast, empty sky. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken her. But as the truck disappeared over the horizon, a faint smile touched Savannah's lips. She wasn't thinking about being rescued. She was thinking about the storm that was coming for them. Miles away, in their modest ranch house, Clay's eyes snapped open at the vibration. He didn't panic. He didn't hesitate. He looked at the coordinates on the screen and his entire demeanor shifted. The calm rancher disappeared, replaced by the cold, focused soldier he once was. He moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency, opening a locked footlocker at the base of his closet. Inside, nestled in foam, was the gear he had prayed he would never need again. Thorne had just crossed a line that was drawn in blood and shadow. He thought he was dealing with a lone woman on a ranch. How wrong could one man be? Clay didn't grab a rifle. That was for a fair fight. He pulled out a black tactical vest, a compact medical kit, a roll of reinforced zip ties, and a Kai-bar knife with a non-reflective blade. His movements were fluid, economical, each action honed by years of repetition in places far more dangerous than this. He wasn't the loving husband who fixed fences and helped birth calves anymore. He was a hunter. He pulled on a dark jacket, grabbed the keys to his beat-up Ford F-150, and walked out the door without a backward glance. The truck looked like every other ranch vehicle in the county, rust spots and all, but under the hood was an engine tuned for pursuit, and beneath the chassis were reinforced steel plates. It was a sleeper, just like him. Before starting the engine, he made a single call. A man named Marcus, who had served alongside him, answered on the first ring. "It's me," Clay said, his voice flat. "Phase 1, check on Maria and the kids." Marcus simply replied, "Understood. Stay dark." The call ended. Maria was Savannah's cousin who lived on a neighboring ranch. Clay was already thinking 2 steps ahead, ensuring his family was safe before he went on the offensive. He started the truck and pulled onto the dirt road, the GPS coordinates on his phone screen his only guide. He drove without headlights, navigating by memory and moonlight. Tied to the tree, Savannah remained calm. The initial surge of adrenaline had passed, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. She tested the ropes, not with frantic pulling, but with small, consistent movements, feeling for any give in the knots. They were amateurs. The knots were tight but clumsy. She analyzed the ground, noting the deep, distinct tire tracks left by the heavy-duty truck. Goodyear Wranglers, one with a slow leak on the rear passenger side. She noted the direction they'd headed, back toward the main highway, toward town. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the Wyoming air grew sharp with a sudden chill. A lone coyote howled in the distance. She wasn't afraid, she was angry, and she was gathering evidence. Jed and Earl were celebrating their easy day's work at the Rusty Spur, a dingy roadside tavern that smelled of stale beer and regret. The place was a known haunt for Thorne's hired muscle. They sat at the bar, nursing cheap whiskies. "Barely broke a sweat," Jed boasted to the bartender, who just polished a glass, uninterested. "That woman acts all tough, but she's just like the rest. A little pressure and she'll fold." Earl laughed, a wheezing sound. "Thorne will have that water contract signed by the end of the week, just like the Millers did after their barn accidentally caught fire." He took out his phone and sent a text to a blocked number. Message delivered, awaiting payment. They ordered another round, confident they had put the fear of God into the Washingtons. They had no idea that God had nothing to do with what was coming for them. Clay parked his truck a half-mile from the coordinates and proceeded on foot. He moved through the sagebrush like a phantom, his steps silent, his profile low. He used the terrain to his advantage, staying in the shadows cast by the rolling hills. He saw the tree first, a dark silhouette against the twilight sky. Then he saw her. He approached from behind, a whisper of movement. Savannah didn't flinch. She had sensed his presence before she saw him. He didn't say a word. He knelt, and the knife slid from its sheath. In 2 swift, precise cuts, the ropes fell away. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. He was already checking her wrists for damage, his touch gentle but firm. "I'm fine," she said, her own voice steady as she rubbed the circulation back into her hands. "They're sloppy, Jed and Earl, driving a dark green Dodge Ram. Those Goodyear tires will lead you right to them." She had already processed the encounter, turning it into actionable intelligence. He pulled a small bottle of water and an energy bar from his vest. "Eat," he commanded softly. While she did, he examined the scene, his eyes missing nothing: the footprints, the discarded cigarette butt, the spit of tobacco juice. He was building a case, but not one that would ever see a courtroom. They walked back to the truck in silence. Inside the cab, the air was thick with unspoken understanding. This was the end of their peaceful life. They both knew it. Clay started the engine. Savannah looked at him, her eyes hard. "Home?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Clay put the truck in gear and turned onto the road, not west toward their ranch, but east, toward the distant glow of town. "No," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We're going hunting." The trap had been set for them, but they were about to turn it on the ones who laid it. Clay killed the engine a block away from the rusty spur, letting the truck coast into the shadows of a closed-down grain silo. The tavern's garish neon sign cast a sickly red glow over the dusty parking lot. "You stay here," Clay said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Keep the engine warm. If anyone comes out besides them, or if you see flashing lights, you leave. Don't wait for me." Savannah just nodded, her eyes scanning the area, already in the role of Overwatch. "I know the plan," she replied. He gave her a quick, hard look, a look that said everything words couldn't, then slipped out of the cab and melted into the darkness. He didn't approach the front door. He circled around the back, moving along a crumbling brick wall, his boots making no sound on the gravel-strewn alley. He found a grimy window, streaked with years of filth, and peered inside. The bar was sparsely populated, a few old-timers hunched over their drinks, a bored-looking bartender, and at a corner table Jed and Earl. They were laughing loudly, their movements sloppy from the whiskey. Clay watched for 2 minutes, memorizing the layout, the exits, and the position of his targets. He noted that Jed had his back to the main entrance. A tactical error. Clay backed away from the window and returned to the front, taking up a position in the deep shadow of a long-abandoned pickup truck directly across from the entrance. And then he waited. Patience was a weapon he had mastered long ago. Inside the truck, Savannah watched the front door. Her phone was in her lap, ready. She wasn't just a getaway driver, she was the second set of eyes, the early warning system. She saw the sheriff's cruiser drive by slowly, the officer inside not even glancing at the tavern before continuing on his patrol, a confirmation of what they already knew. The law in this town was either complicit or blind. Her anger, once a hot fire, had cooled into something harder and more dangerous. Steel. After nearly an hour, the tavern door swung open. Jed stumbled out first, followed by Earl, who was fumbling with his keys. "I'm telling you," Jed slurred, "that was the easiest money I ever made." Clay didn't move. He let them get to the middle of the parking lot, away from the door, away from any potential help. He let them get to their dark green Dodge Ram, the one with the slightly low rear passenger tire. The moment Earl clicked the button to unlock the doors was the moment Clay chose to move. He wasn't a man walking, he was a predator closing the distance. Jed heard the faint crunch of gravel behind him and started to turn, his drunken reflexes a fraction too slow. Clay's hand shot out, not in a punch, but with stiffened fingers, striking Jed precisely in the throat. The big man made a choked, gurgling sound and dropped to his knees, clawing at his neck, unable to breathe or shout. Earl spun around, his eyes wide with shock, his hand instinctively going to the hunting knife on his belt. He never had a chance to draw it. Clay pivoted, a blur of motion, and delivered a sharp, disabling kick to Earl's knee. The joint buckled with an audible pop, and Earl screamed as he hit the ground. Before the scream could fully leave his lips, Clay was on him, one hand clamping over his mouth, the other pressing the cold, hard edge of the K-bar knife against his cheek. "You're going to be quiet now," Clay whispered, his voice dangerously calm. "You're going to answer some questions. Nod if you understand." Earl, his face a mask of terror and pain, nodded frantically. Clay dragged both men behind the tavern into the pitch-black alley. Jed was still on the ground, gasping for air. Clay pulled out his phone, activated the voice recorder and tossed it to Earl. "Hold it! Now talk! Who paid you?" Earl, whimpering, stammered, "It was Thorne. It's always Thorne." "How does he pay you?" Clay pressed. "Cash drops, sometimes a wire from a shell company, Frontier Holdings." "Show me the text you sent him," Clay demanded. Shaking, Earl pulled out his phone and showed Clay the sent message. Clay took a picture of it with his own phone. "You have 5 minutes to be out of this county," Clay said, his voice dropping to a near-zero temperature. "If I ever see you again, I won't ask questions." He pulled out the zip ties and efficiently bound both men's hands and feet. He took their wallets and keys, tossing them onto the roof of the tavern. Then he took Earl's hunting knife and pinned a note he'd written earlier to Jed's shirt. It was a simple piece of paper with 3 words written in block letters: "We are coming." He left them there, trussed up and helpless in the filth of the alley. He walked back to his truck, got in, and looked at Savannah. She had seen everything. "I got it all on recording," she said, holding up her phone. Clay nodded, put the truck in gear and pulled away as silently as he had arrived. They hadn't just sent a message, they had declared war. The drive back toward the Circle W was silent. The darkness of the Wyoming plains pressing in on the truck. The only light came from the dashboard and the faint glow of Savannah's phone as she replayed the recording. Earl's terrified, whimpering voice filled the cab. It was Thorne. It's always Thorne. Cash drops, sometimes a wire from a shell company, Frontier Holdings. She stopped the recording. "A confession from a man under duress," she said, the pragmatist in her taking over. "Thorne's lawyers would tear it apart. Say you coerced him." "It's not for a courtroom," Clay replied, his eyes fixed on the long, empty road. "It's for leverage, and for our neighbors." Savannah understood immediately. This wasn't just about them anymore. It couldn't be. Thorne had been preying on this community for years, isolating families, picking them off one by one. The Millers and their barn fire, the Jacksons, who were forced to sell after their herd was mysteriously poisoned. Everyone knew Thorne was behind it, but no one had proof, and no one was willing to be the first to stand up. Fear was Thorne's most effective weapon. They didn't go to their own ranch. It wasn't safe. Instead, Clay turned down a side road leading to Maria's place, a smaller but well-kept property 5 miles west. As they pulled up to the main house, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the porch. It was Marcus, Clay's former teammate. He was a tall, powerfully built man with a calm, watchful presence. "Took you long enough," Marcus said, his voice a low baritone. He wasn't smiling. "Maria and the kids are fine. They're with her sister in the next county. Figured you'd need the place to yourselves." "Trouble found us," Clay said simply. "Trouble always knows your address," Marcus replied, his eyes moving from Clay to Savannah with a look of deep respect. "What's the play?" "We're making it up as we go," Savannah answered, stepping out of the truck. "But first, we need to make a call." Meanwhile, back in town, Sheriff Brody's cruiser rolled into the alley behind the rusty spur. He'd gotten an anonymous tip about a disturbance. He found Jed and Earl exactly where Clay had left them. Jed was conscious now, his throat a mess of bruises. Earl was shivering, more from fear than cold. Brody looked at them, then at the note pinned to Jed's shirt. He didn't call for an ambulance or backup. He pulled out his personal cell phone and dialed a number from his favorites list. Silas Thorne answered from his leather chair in a sprawling home office that overlooked the entire valley. The walls were adorned with taxidermy heads and maps of the lands he'd acquired. "What is it, Brody?" he asked, his voice smooth and cultured, a stark contrast to the brutality he employed. "We have a problem," Brody said, keeping his voice low. "Your 2 boys. Someone got to them, left them tied up behind the spur, left a note too." There was a pause. "What did the note say?" Thorne asked, his tone unchanged. "It said, 'We are coming.'" Thorne was silent for a long moment. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. He had underestimated them. The rancher was one thing, but this response was disciplined, precise, and professional. This was the husband. "Clean it up, Brody. Get them out of town. And don't file a report. This never happened." He hung up before the sheriff could reply. Thorne stared out at the twinkling lights of the town below. This was no longer a simple land acquisition. This was pest control. He picked up another phone, a secure satellite phone, and dialed a number that wasn't stored in any contact list. When a voice answered, Thorne said only 5 words. "I have a job for you." Back at Maria's ranch, Savannah was on the phone with Hector Vargas, a 70-year-old rancher whose family had lost half their grazing land to a Frontier Holdings lawsuit 2 years ago. Hector was the unofficial elder of the ranching community, a man whose word carried immense weight. "Hector," Savannah said, her voice firm, "it's happening again. They came for me today, but this time is different. This time we have proof." She sent him the audio file. "Meet us. Maria's barn. 1 hour. Spread the word to anyone you trust. No phones." An hour later, the barn was filled with shadows and the low murmur of nervous voices. Hector was there, his face etched with a lifetime of hard work. The Jackson brothers were there, their eyes still holding the pain of losing their ranch. A half-dozen other ranchers, all victims of Thorne's campaign of terror, stood gathered in a tight circle. Clay and Marcus stood at the entrance, silent sentinels. Savannah stood in the middle, her phone in her hand. "For years, Thorne has treated us like we're weak," she began, her voice ringing with clarity in the cavernous space. "He's used lawyers and thugs to isolate us and bleed us dry. He thinks if he pushes one of us, the rest will run and hide." She paused, letting her words sink in. "He pushed me today, and I'm not hiding." She played the recording. Earl's voice, raw with fear, filled the barn. When it was over, a heavy silence fell. Hector Vargas was the first to speak. "That's the first real proof we've ever had," he said, his old voice surprisingly strong. "What do you want to do, Savannah?" Savannah looked from face to face, meeting each person's gaze. "He thinks he can break us apart. So we're going to show him what happens when we stand together. We're not just going to save my ranch, we're going to take back everything he stole from all of us." The war was no longer just Clay and Savannah's. It now had an army. The energy in Maria's barn was a mix of fear and defiant hope. Savannah laid out the first phase of their plan. "We fight Thorne on 2 fronts, she explained, her voice steady and commanding. "The first is legal. I have a friend from law school, David Chen, who's now an environmental lawyer in Cheyenne. He's not afraid of a fight. I'm sending him the recording and a full history of everything Thorne has done to all of us. He can look into Frontier Holdings, find the dirty money." One of the Jackson brothers spoke up, his voice skeptical. "And what's the second front? Thorne doesn't fight with lawyers. He fights with fire and fence cutters." Clay stepped forward, addressing the group for the first time. His presence alone commanded silence. "The second front is here, at home. Thorne will retaliate for what happened to his men. He'll hit harder this time, so we prepare. We're not victims waiting for the next attack. We're a defense force." Under Clay and Marcus's direction, the group of ranchers transformed into a surprisingly effective militia. They weren't soldiers, but they were hard-working people who knew their land better than anyone. They organized watch schedules, patrolling the perimeters of each other's properties in shifts. They set up a simple communication network using old CB radios, untraceable and reliable. They reinforced barn doors and installed solar-powered floodlights in blind spots. For the first time in years, they weren't isolated. They were a community united by a common enemy. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a sense of purpose. In his mansion on the hill, Silas Thorne was also making plans. A sleek, black sedan with tinted windows had arrived an hour after his call. The man who stepped out was the opposite of Jed and Earl. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored grey suit. His name was Corbin, and he moved with an unnerving stillness. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a corporate analyst. In Thorne's office, he listened without expression as Thorne detailed the situation. "They're organizing," Thorne said, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. "The husband, Clay Washington, is former Special Forces. He's the one who handled my men." Corbin simply nodded, his eyes scanning a tablet displaying satellite images of the Circle W and Maria's ranch. Amateurs are predictable when they organize. They create patterns. Patterns create vulnerabilities. "I don't want a message sent this time, Corbin," Thorne said, his voice cold. "I want the head of the snake cut off. I want the husband neutralized permanently." Corbin looked up from the tablet, his gaze empty and chilling. "Reconnaissance first, then decapitation. I'll handle it." He stood up, placed a small encrypted satellite phone on the desk and said, "You'll be updated through this. Do not contact me on any other device." He then walked out, leaving Thorne feeling, for the first time, like he was not the most dangerous man in the room. That night, the new system was in effect. Hector and one of the Jackson brothers were on watch at Maria's ranch, stationed at opposite ends of the property. They reported in every 30 minutes on the CB radio. All quiet on the west end. East side is clear. Inside the house, Clay and Marcus were poring over county maps, planning supply routes in case Thorne tried to blockade them. Savannah was on a video call with David Chen, the lawyer, outlining the case against Frontier Holdings. There was a sense of control, of taking the power back. It was a fatal illusion. Around 2 a.m., Clay felt it. Not a sound, but a change in the air, a primal instinct screaming that something was wrong. He looked at Marcus, who had also gone rigid. "Did you hear that?" Clay whispered. Marcus shook his head. "No, but I felt it." They moved without a word, grabbing weapons from a duffel bag. They swept the house room by room with practiced, silent efficiency. Nothing was out of place. The windows were locked, the doors were secure. They checked on Savannah, who was asleep in one of the bedrooms. She was safe. They returned to the kitchen, puzzled. "Maybe we're just on edge," Marcus suggested, though he didn't believe it. Then Clay saw it. On the center of the kitchen table, where their maps were laid out, sat a single object that hadn't been there minutes before. It was a .308 caliber sniper round, standing perfectly upright on its base, its brass casing gleaming under the dim kitchen light. It was an impossible object. They had cleared the room. The doors were locked. The ranchers on patrol had reported nothing. Yet here it was. It was a message far more terrifying than a note pinned to a shirt. It said, "I was in this room with you. I watched you plan. I could have ended you all while you slept. Your locks, your guards, your plans, they mean nothing." Clay and Marcus stared at the bullet, the full weight of its meaning crashing down on them. Their carefully constructed defenses had been breached without a single sound. The hope that had filled the barn hours earlier evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard certainty that they were no longer fighting a land baron. They were being hunted by a ghost. Clay's first move wasn't to search the house again. That was pointless. The ghost was already gone. His first move was to protect his wife. He strode silently to the bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of Savannah's breathing. For a full minute he was not a soldier, but a husband, terrified. The cold fury returned just as quickly. He woke Marcus with a single gesture and pointed toward the kitchen table. Marcus saw the bullet and all the color drained from his face. "How?" he mouthed silently. Clay just shook his head. He gently woke Savannah. She opened her eyes and immediately sensed the tension. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. Clay didn't speak. He led her to the kitchen and pointed at the bullet. She stared at it, her mind processing the implications with the same speed he had. She looked at the locked doors, the secure windows, and then back at the bullet. She didn't gasp or cry. Her jaw tightened. "So he's a professional," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Thorne is done playing games." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Their sense of safety, their belief that they could fortify and defend, was shattered. It was a violation designed to breed paranoia and fear, to make them question every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. "Our patrols are useless," Marcus stated, the reality of their situation dawning on him. He walked right past them. He could have been standing behind Hector in the dark, and the old man never would have known. Clay picked up the bullet with a pair of tweezers from the medical kit and dropped it into a small evidence bag. "This wasn't about killing us," he said, his mind already analyzing the enemy's tactics. "Not yet. This was a demonstration of capability. He's telling us he controls the battlefield. He's trying to make us panic, make a mistake." At dawn, they gathered the ranchers in the barn again. The mood was starkly different from the night before. The hopeful energy was gone, replaced by a heavy, anxious silence. Clay placed the small bag with the bullet on an upturned barrel in the center of the group. "Last night, the man Thorne hired paid us a visit," Clay said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He came and went without anyone seeing or hearing a thing. He left this on the kitchen table." A wave of fear washed over the ranchers. One of them, a young man named Ben Jackson, backed away. "This is insane," he stammered. "We're ranchers, not soldiers. We have families. We can't fight someone like that." A few others nodded in agreement, their newfound resolve crumbling. Before the panic could spread, Hector Vargas stepped forward. He picked up the bag and held it up for everyone to see. "Look at this," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "This bullet is not a sign of Thorne's strength. It's a sign of his desperation. He's scared. For the first time, we have him on the defensive. We have proof, we have a lawyer, and we are united. He's trying to scare us back into our holes because he knows that if we stand together, he loses." He looked directly at Ben Jackson. "Your family is exactly why you have to fight. Do you want your children to grow up under the thumb of a man like Thorne?" Savannah stepped up beside Hector. "Hector is right. This changes things, but it doesn't end things. It just means we have to be smarter. We can't win by building higher walls. We have to go on the attack." While the community wrestled with its fear, Corbin was miles away, perched on a rocky outcropping overlooking the valley. Using a high-powered spotting scope, he watched the activity at Maria's ranch. He saw the ranchers gathering. He saw their body language shift from confident to fearful. He pulled out his encrypted phone and sent a text to the one Thorne had given him. Psychological objective achieved. Target leadership is aware of vulnerability. Community morale compromised. Awaiting instructions for Phase 2. Thorne received the message as he was eating breakfast. He smiled. This was worth every penny. He texted back a single word: continue. Back in the barn, the debate was over. Hector's words had shored up their courage. They were still afraid, but now they were angry too. The focus shifted to Clay. "What's the new plan?" Hector asked. Clay looked at the map on the table, the one the intruder had stood over. He was no longer thinking about defense. "We can't protect everywhere at once," Clay said. "It's impossible, so we stop trying. We're going to turn the tables. This man, this ghost, he thinks he's the hunter. We're going to make him the hunted." He looked at Marcus. "He has to have a base of operations, a hide. He's not living in the sagebrush. He's somewhere he can observe, plan, and resupply. He's a professional," Marcus added. "He'll be using Thorne's resources. A rental property, a secluded cabin, something owned by one of Frontier Holdings' shell companies." Savannah's eyes lit up. "I can get that information to David. He can start digging into Frontier's property holdings in the county. It'll give you a list of places to start looking." The strategy had fundamentally shifted. The ranchers would continue their patrols, but now their purpose was not to stop an intruder, but to spot one. To find a trace, a tire track, anything out of place that could lead Clay and Marcus to their ghost. The community would become a network of eyes and ears. Clay and Marcus would become a two-man hunter-killer team. They were done waiting for the monster to come out of the dark. They were going into the dark to drag it into the light. The hunt began. While the ranchers maintained a visible, almost theatrical patrol schedule, Clay and Marcus operated in the shadows. They became nocturnal, sleeping in short bursts during the day and moving at night. They didn't use trucks that could be heard for miles. They used old, quiet dirt bikes, their engines muffled, allowing them to traverse the rugged terrain silently. They were hunting a ghost, so they had to become ghosts themselves. Savannah became their intelligence hub. Working from the relative safety of Maria's house, she was in constant contact with David Chen. The lawyer was a bulldog, and he was making progress. He'd found 3 properties in the county owned by a shell corporation called Mountain View Investments, which he'd linked back to Frontier Holdings. He sent Savannah the addresses and plat maps. One was a commercial warehouse in town, too public. Another was a tract of undeveloped land, no structures. The third was a secluded hunting cabin deep in the Bighorn Mountains, accessible only by a single, poorly maintained fire road. It was the perfect hideout. "That's our spot," Clay said, looking at the satellite image Savannah pulled up on her laptop. "High ground, excellent fields of fire, overlooks the main highway into the valley. He can see everything from up there." The rancher's network started to yield results. An old-timer named Gus, who lived on the edge of the national forest, reported seeing a black sedan, not a truck, a sedan, driving up the fire road toward the old cabin 2 days ago. It was an oddity he'd noted, but thought nothing of until now. Another rancher, whose property bordered the base of the mountains, found a small, high-end MRE, meal, ready-to-eat, wrapper, caught in a barbed wire fence. It wasn't the kind of thing local hunters used. It was military grade. The pieces were coming together. They had a location. Now they had to lay a trap. A frontal assault on a prepared position held by a professional like Corbin would be suicide. "He's expecting us to come to him," Clay reasoned. "He wants us to. It's his kill box. So we're not going to." He looked at Savannah. "We need to give him a reason to come down from his mountain." The plan was simple, and its success depended on Corbin's arrogance. Savannah, through David, leaked a piece of information to a friendly journalist in Cheyenne. The story was that David Chen had found a major breakthrough in the case against Frontier Holdings, a former disgruntled accountant willing to testify. The article, which ran online, announced that David would be flying into the small local airport the next day to meet with Savannah and the whistleblower in person. It was all a lie. The whistleblower didn't exist. Corbin saw the article within an hour of its publication. He immediately recognized the threat. A whistleblower could bring down Thorne's entire empire. Legal proceedings would mean federal oversight, investigations, and an end to his lucrative contract. He had to sever the connection. His objective, given to him by Thorne, was to neutralize the husband. But a professional operator knows that sometimes the mission parameters change. Eliminating the lawyer and the rancher's wife, the two pillars of the legal case, was now the priority. It was a more efficient way to achieve Thorne's ultimate goal. He sent a message to Thorne. New threat emerged. Lawyer and source request permission to engage. Thorne, seeing his empire threatened, replied instantly, "Eliminate all threats, no witnesses." Corbin began his preparations. The meeting was a public-facing event, a vulnerability he could exploit. He packed a duffel bag, not with a sniper rifle, but with the tools for a different kind of work. He would make it look like a tragic accident, a car crash on a lonely stretch of road. He cleaned his cabin, wiping down every surface, leaving no trace he was ever there. He was a professional. He always cleaned up after himself. What Corbin didn't know was that Clay and Marcus were already moving. They weren't waiting for him to come to them. Under the cover of darkness, they rode their dirt bikes up a treacherous, long-forgotten mule track on the opposite side of the mountain, miles from the fire road Corbin used. They ditched the bikes a mile from the cabin and proceeded on foot, moving with painstaking slowness through the dense pine forest. They carried no firearms. This was not an assault. It was an infiltration. They arrived at the edge of the clearing, where the cabin stood just as the first rays of dawn broke the horizon. They saw the black sedan parked outside. They saw a single light on inside, and then they saw Corbin emerge, duffel bag in hand, get into the car, and drive down the fire road, heading toward the valley. The hunter had left his lair. The trap was sprung. As Corbin's sedan disappeared down the mountain, Clay and Marcus didn't move for a full 5 minutes. They watched, listened, and scanned the tree line, ensuring he hadn't left any surprises behind. A professional like Corbin might set a booby trap or leave a surveillance device. When they were certain the area was clear, they moved in. The cabin was small, functional, and disturbingly clean. There were no personal items, no trash, no clues. It was as if a ghost had stayed there. He wiped it down, Marcus noted, running a gloved finger over a countertop. Not a single print. But Clay wasn't looking for fingerprints. He was looking for what Corbin couldn't take with him. He checked under the floorboards, behind the walls, and in the ceiling panels. In the small attic space above the main room, he found it. Tucked away in a dusty corner was a small, hardened pelican case. Inside, nestled in foam, was a high-end satellite modem and a powerful laptop. Corbin had taken his primary encrypted phone, but he'd left his intelligence and communication hub behind, likely planning to retrieve it after his mission was complete. It was a calculated risk on his part, but a fatal mistake. "Get Savannah on the line," Clay said, his voice tight with excitement. "Tell her we have his brain." Meanwhile, Corbin drove toward the valley, his mind focused on the mission. He had already scouted the road from the local airport. There was a sharp, blind curve about 5 miles out of town with a steep drop-off, a perfect spot. He would disable their vehicle, make it look like they lost control, and ensure the resulting fire destroyed any evidence. He was meticulous, calm, and utterly confident. He checked his watch. The flight was due to land in 2 hours. He had plenty of time. Down in the valley, the second part of the trap was being set. Savannah wasn't going to the airport. Hector Vargas was. The old rancher, dressed in his Sunday best, drove his clean but aging pickup truck to the small terminal. He walked inside, sat on a bench with a newspaper, and waited. His job was simple, to be the visible confirmation that the targets were behaving as expected. Anyone watching would see an old man waiting to pick someone up. The real action was happening on that lonely stretch of road Corbin had selected. The ranchers, using their knowledge of the local terrain, had set up a roadblock. It didn't look like a roadblock. It looked like a cattle drive. Ben Jackson and his brother, using their own herd, were slowly moving about 50 head of cattle across the pavement, completely blocking the road. It was a common enough sight in this part of Wyoming that it wouldn't raise any suspicion. Hidden in the trees on either side of the road, armed with hunting rifles, were 4 other ranchers. They weren't there to fight. They were there to make sure Corbin couldn't escape. Clay and Marcus worked quickly on the laptop. It was heavily encrypted, but Marcus had spent years in signals intelligence. Bypassing the security was a slow, painstaking process. "He's good," Marcus muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "But he's using a standard agency protocol. I can get through it, I just need time." "You have about an hour," Clay said, looking at his watch. He used Corbin's satellite modem to send a single encrypted text to Savannah. "He's on his way. Is everything in place?" Savannah's reply was immediate. "The herd is on the move. Hector is at the airport. The road is ours." Corbin saw the cattle from a half-mile away and slowed his sedan, annoyed at the delay. He pulled over to the side of the road to wait for the ranchers to clear a path. He was patient. He scanned the scene, his professional paranoia kicking in. 2 ranchers on horseback, a herd of cattle. It all looked normal. Too normal. He reached for the Glock holstered under his jacket, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. Back in the cabin, Marcus let out a grunt of triumph. "I'm in," he said. The laptop screen flickered to life, revealing Corbin's entire operation. There were satellite maps with marked routes, detailed dossiers on Clay and Savannah, and most importantly, a folder labeled Financial. Inside was a ledger of untraceable crypto payments from a numbered account. Marcus followed the digital trail, and within minutes he found the source. The account was funded by a series of wire transfers that originated from none other than Frontier Holdings. It was the smoking gun, the direct, undeniable link between Thorne and the assassin he'd hired. "We got him, Clay," Marcus said, a rare smile on his face. "We got Thorne cold." Clay took a picture of the screen with his phone and sent it to Savannah. Her reply came a second later. "Send it to David. Now." As Marcus began uploading the files to a secure server for the lawyer, Clay looked at the other files on the laptop. There was a folder labeled Contingency. He opened it. Inside was a single file, a detailed schematic of Silas Thorne's mansion, complete with security camera locations, alarm system codes, and the location of a hidden panic room. Corbin was a true professional. He always had an escape plan, and if things went bad, he had a plan to deal with his employer. Clay looked at the schematic. The hunter had given them the keys to the king's castle. The game had just changed once again. Now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about justice. And justice was going to be delivered to Thorne's front door. He picked up his radio. "Savannah, tell the boys to hold him. Don't engage. Just keep him boxed in. We're coming down." Corbin's patience lasted for exactly 90 seconds. He saw a flicker of movement in the trees, a glint of sunlight off a rifle scope. His instincts, honed in a dozen war-torn countries, confirmed what his mind already knew. This wasn't a delay, it was a kill box. But he was the one being boxed in. He wasn't going to be a sitting duck. He slammed the sedan into drive, the engine roaring. He wasn't aiming for the gap in the herd, he was aiming for the herd itself. He floored the accelerator, turning his 2-ton vehicle into a battering ram. The cattle panicked, bellowing in terror as the car smashed into them. Ben Jackson and his brother shouted, fighting to control their spooked animals as the sedan plowed a bloody path through the living roadblock. Corbin was creating chaos, a smokescreen of dust and panicked livestock he could use to escape. The ranchers in the trees held their fire, their targets obscured by the stampeding animals. For a moment, it looked like the plan would fail. Just as Corbin's car broke through the last of the herd, Clay's beat-up Ford F-150 came roaring around the bend from the opposite direction. Clay didn't swerve. He aimed directly for the sedan, his face a mask of cold determination. Corbin saw the truck coming and wrenched his steering wheel to the side, trying to avoid a head-on collision. The reinforced steel bumper of Clay's truck slammed into the front quarter panel of the sedan with a deafening shriek of tearing metal. The sedan spun out, its engine dying as it crashed into a ditch, steam and smoke pouring from under its crumpled hood. The driver's side door of the sedan was flung open before the vehicle had even settled. Corbin emerged, not shaken, but energized by the violence. He had a deep gash on his forehead, but his eyes were clear and focused. He held a combat knife in his hand, its blade dark and non-reflective. Clay got out of his truck, his own K-bar in his grip. The two men circled each other in the middle of the chaotic road, the terrified cattle stampeding around them. They came together in a blur of deadly motion. Corbin was faster, his movements a fluid dance of feints and slashes. Clay was stronger, his style more brutal and direct, focused on blocks and powerful counterattacks. The knives rang out as steel met steel. Corbin lunged, and Clay parried, the force of the blow sending a shock up his arm. The professional assassin was living up to his reputation. He was a viper, striking again and again. As Clay was forced to take a step back, a shadow fell over Corbin. Marcus had circled around during the chaos. He didn't say a word. He swung his rifle like a club, the heavy wooden stock connecting solidly with the back of Corbin's knee. The leg buckled and Corbin grunted in pain, his balance broken for just a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Clay needed. He stepped in, not with his knife, but with his fist, delivering a single devastating punch to Corbin's jaw. The man's head snapped back, and he dropped to the ground, unconscious. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. The ranchers emerged from the woods, their rifles lowered, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Clay stood over Corbin's motionless body, breathing heavily. He took out his zip ties and efficiently bound the assassin's hands and feet. A moment later, Savannah's truck pulled up. She got out, her face calm, and walked over to where Clay and Marcus stood over their captive. She looked down at the man who had invaded her home, the man who was sent to kill her and her husband. She felt no fear, only a cold, satisfying sense of victory. Corbin was beginning to stir, his eyes fluttering open. He looked up at the faces surrounding him and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "You're all dead," he rasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "We know exactly who we're messing with," Savannah said, her voice like ice. She knelt and pulled the encrypted satellite phone from Corbin's jacket pocket. Just as she stood up, the phone began to vibrate. The screen displayed a single name: Thorn. Every rancher fell silent. Savannah looked at Clay and handed him the phone. Clay answered it and put it on speaker. "Is it done?" Silas Thorne's smooth, arrogant voice filled the air. Clay looked down at the bound and beaten man at his feet. "Your man had a bit of car trouble," Clay said, his voice flat and cold. "He won't be completing his contract." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Clay could almost hear the gears turning in Thorne's mind, the arrogance being replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "Who is this?" Thorne demanded. "You know who this is," Clay replied. "We have your man. We have your records, and now we're coming for you." He ended the call and tossed the phone to Savannah. The final battle was about to begin. They didn't celebrate. The capture of Corbin wasn't a victory. It was a trigger. The final phase had begun. Clay hauled the bound assassin into the back of a spare truck while Marcus removed the battery from his sedan. The ranchers, their adrenaline still pumping, looked to Savannah for orders. "Go home," she commanded, her voice firm. "Lock your doors. Stay off the radio. This is our fight now." They hesitated, then nodded, understanding that this had escalated beyond patrols and hunting rifles. They melted back to their ranches, a silent army returning to their posts. "What's the play?" Marcus asked Clay, wiping Corbin's blood from his rifle stock. Clay was studying the picture of Thorne's mansion schematic on his phone. "Corbin gave us a key. We're going to use it." He looked at Savannah. "You're our eye in the sky. Use his laptop. You'll be our navigator." The plan was audacious. They wouldn't wait for the law, which was compromised, or for David's case to work its way through the courts, which would take months. They were going to end it tonight. They drove not to Maria's ranch, but to the edge of Thorne's sprawling estate. The mansion was a monument to arrogance, lit up like a fortress on its private hill overlooking the valley. Savannah set up a command post in her truck half a mile away, Corbin's laptop open and glowing. "I'm in," she said over a secure radio channel. "I can see his internal camera feeds. He's in his office, pacing like a caged animal." Clay and Marcus, dressed in dark clothing, moved toward the high stone wall surrounding the property. Using the schematics, they located a blind spot in the camera coverage, a section of wall obscured by a cluster of old pine trees. In minutes, they were over the wall and on the grounds, moving from shadow to shadow with a terrifying grace. "You have a two-man patrol on the west side," Savannah's voice crackled in their earpieces. "They're lazy, on a predictable route. Avoid them." They did, melting into the manicured gardens, bypassing the motion sensors whose locations were clearly marked on Corbin's map. They reached the house itself, using a code from the schematic to bypass the alarm on a rear service door. They were inside. The house was silent, its sterile opulence a stark contrast to the raw nature of the land it dominated. Suddenly, Savannah's voice was sharp. "Clay, hold! We have a problem. A vehicle is coming up the main drive. Fast! It's Sheriff Brody." Clay and Marcus froze in a darkened hallway. They could hear the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Thorne, in his panic, had called his one loyal dog. Brody entered the house without knocking, his hand on his holstered pistol. "Mr. Thorne?" he called out, his voice nervous. "In here, you fool!" Thorne's voice boomed from the office down the hall. Brody walked right past the hallway where Clay and Marcus were concealed. As he entered the office, Clay gave Marcus a nod. They followed, silent as death. They stood on either side of the doorway, listening. "They have Corbin," Thorne said, his voice strained. "They're coming." "What do you want me to do?" Brody asked, his bravado gone. "Call in the state police. Claim they're trespassing." "No," Thorne snapped. "You are going to handle this." That's when Clay stepped into the room. Brody spun around, his eyes wide, fumbling to draw his weapon. Marcus stepped in behind him, pressing the barrel of his rifle into the sheriff's back. "I wouldn't," Marcus said calmly. Brody froze, his hands slowly going up. Thorne stared at Clay, his face pale with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. He backed away toward his large oak desk, reaching for a drawer. "Don't!" Clay said, his voice low. "It's over. This is my house. You're the criminals here." Thorne blustered. "Is that so?" Savannah's voice suddenly filled the room, broadcast from Thorne's own high-end speaker system. She had hacked into his network. "Because David Chen, my lawyer, has just filed a RICO case against you and Frontier Holdings with the U.S. Attorney's Office. He attached the audio confession from your man Earl. He also attached the financial records from Corbin's laptop, showing your direct payments for, what was the term Corbin used? Decapitation." Thorne looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Sheriff Brody's face went white. He knew he was implicated. "You have two choices, Thorne," Clay said, stepping forward. He placed a thick stack of legal documents on the polished desk. "Choice 1. You can face federal charges for racketeering, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You'll die in prison." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Or choice 2. He slid a pen across the desk. "These are land transfer deeds. You will sign over every property you illegally acquired from my neighbors back to their families. The Millers, the Jacksons, all of them. You will also sign a legally binding bill of sale for the Circle W's water rights to me for $1. Thorne stared at the papers, then at Clay, his mind unable to process the totality of his defeat. This wasn't the ending he'd ever imagined. He wasn't being shot. He was being erased. "This is extortion," he spat. "No!" Savannah's voice replied from the speakers. "This is justice." Clay just stood there waiting. Thorne, broken and defeated, his empire crumbling around him, picked up the pen. The king was dethroned, not with a bullet, but with a signature. With a final, shaky signature, Silas Thorne's empire ceased to exist. Clay calmly collected the signed deeds. Marcus relieved Sheriff Brody of his badge and weapon, using the man's own handcuffs to secure him. Thorne slumped into his leather chair, a hollowed-out man, the arrogance and power gone, replaced by the vacant stare of defeat. He didn't even look up as they walked out of his office, leaving him to await the federal agents that were already on their way. They didn't take Brody to the county jail. They drove him to a remote, abandoned airstrip, miles out of town. In the back of the spare truck, Corbin was conscious, his cold eyes promising a future of revenge that would never come. Clay made a call. "David," he said into his phone, "it's done. Send the package." David Chen, on the other end, already had a team of U.S. Marshals on standby in Cheyenne, waiting for the go-ahead. He gave them the location. Clay and Marcus left the truck at the airstrip. Inside, they left the bound Corbin, the cuffed and gagged Sheriff Brody, and the Pelican case containing Corbin's laptop, a treasure trove of evidence for the federal government. They wiped their prints, walked a mile through the sagebrush to where Savannah was waiting, and drove away without looking back. They were ranchers again, not soldiers. They had done their part. 6 weeks later, the valley was a different place. The news had been a firestorm. Silas Thorne was indicted on a dozen federal charges, his assets frozen, his empire dismantled by prosecutors who used the evidence from Corbin's laptop to unravel a decade of corruption. Sheriff Brody, facing the rest of his life in prison, had confessed to everything, implicating Thorne in crimes the ranchers hadn't even known about. And Corbin, the ghost, was now in a federal supermax prison, a nameless face in the system he had once expertly navigated from the shadows. But the real change wasn't on the news. It was in the faces of the people. One Saturday afternoon, the entire community gathered at the Circle W for a barbecue. The Jackson brothers were there, laughing as their kids chased chickens in the yard. They had their land back. Hector Vargas, holding a beer, stood on the porch and raised a toast. "To Savannah and Clay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They reminded us that one person's courage can become a community's strength. They showed us that this land is ours and we don't back down." Later that evening, as the sun set and the last of their neighbors drove home, Clay and Savannah sat on their porch, the first moment of true peace they'd had in months. The soldier was gone from Clay's eyes, replaced once again by the quiet calm of the man she loved. He was a rancher, a husband, that was all. "Think you can get used to this again?" Savannah asked softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "No ambushes, no ghosts, no secret missions." Clay put his arm around her, pulling her close. "This is what I was fighting for," he said. "This was always the mission." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to a deep star-filled purple. In the distance, just visible on a low rise, was the silhouette of the old cottonwood tree. It was no longer a place of fear or a symbol of intimidation. It was a landmark. It was a testament to their resilience. It was the place where a corrupt man's message of terror had been sent back 100 times stronger by a community that refused to be broken. The tree had stood there for 100 years, and it would stand for 100 more, a silent guardian of the land and the unshakable people who called it home. What happened in that valley wasn't just a victory for one family. It was a lesson for anyone who has ever felt powerless. Silas Thorne's greatest weapon was never his money or his thugs. It was the belief that he could isolate people, making them feel alone and afraid. He believed that by targeting one ranch, he could terrorize a dozen others into silence. He was wrong. The moment Savannah Washington decided to fight back, and the moment her community decided to stand with her, the balance of power shifted. Thorne's empire wasn't brought down by a single bullet, but by the collective will of a people who refused to be erased. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always about who can fight the hardest. It's about who refuses to give up. It's the quiet resilience of Savannah, who turned her own terror into actionable intelligence. It's the reluctant courage of Clay, who brought his past back from the shadows, not for revenge, but for protection. And it's the rediscovered unity of the ranchers, who turned their shared victimhood into a shared, unbreakable defense. The tree where Savannah was tied was meant to be a tombstone for her hope. Instead, it became a symbol of their roots, a sign that they were planted too deeply in that land to ever be removed. We believe that stories like these matter. They are more than just entertainment. They are a blueprint for courage. They show us that no matter how powerful or intimidating an oppressor may seem, they are never stronger than a community that is united in its purpose. The fight for what is right is often difficult, and it often happens in the quiet, forgotten places of the world, but it is always a fight worth having. If you agree, and if this story of justice and resilience moved you, please help us share it by hitting the like button. It's a small action that makes a huge difference in helping these narratives reach more people. And if you want to be a part of a community that champions these stories, consider subscribing to the channel. We are dedicated to finding and sharing tales of the underdog, the forgotten, and the brave, and we would be honored to have you with us. We read every single comment, and we want to give a special shout out to the dedicated viewers who stick with us through every twist and turn. To show us that you're one of them, and that you stand for the kind of justice you saw today, please go to the comment section and type the phrase, "I watched until the end." It lets us know who our most passionate supporters are, and it tells the platform that stories of integrity and strength are what people want to see. The fight is never truly over, and another story of incredible perseverance is ready for you right now. What happens when a city tries to seize a veteran's humble home? They thought he was a frail old man. They had no idea he had friends in very, very high places. Click on the video that's appearing on your screen now to find out what happens next. Thank you for your time and your support. We'll see you there.